So that being said, what are the best rotator cuff exercises for shoulder pain during the bench press, right? And we talked about this a little bit previously, but why am I concerned about the rotator cuff in the bench press? Well, first and foremost, it's a potential source of pain, all right? And if you start looking through our medical literature, right, on the bench press and what the most common types of injuries are, you'll see tendonitis being one of the first ones, okay? And which of the rotator cuff muscles do you think gets aggravated? Well, generally speaking, the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus, so the top and the back part of the rotator cuff, most often have tearing over the course of time, right? Can you tear the other ones? Of course you can. But generally speaking, the supra and the infra are the most common injuries, okay? So here's the other thing that's important about the infraspinatus and the supraspinatus. Infraspinatus maybe even more so. So when you bench press, you will utilize your pecs and you're going to use your delts, okay? They attach on the front of the humerus, okay? So when they contract really hard when I'm doing a bench press, that's going to pull the ball anteriorly or forward in the socket, all right? Now, the infraspinatus sits on the backside of the joint and it has to fire with equal force as the pecs and the delts to keep the ball centered in the socket, all right? So I want to try to stress the rotator cuff, so I want to stress the infraspinatus and the supraspinatus because A, they're probably one of the injured structures, and exercise is going to heal that structure. And the other part is that the infraspinatus is what controls motion within the joint when I bench press. So it makes total sense that I should be focusing on these areas, right? So one of my pet peeves when it comes to rehab of the shoulder, and this is more, I think, popular in the strength and conditioning world, right, and also in the social media world, not necessarily in the physical therapy world, is that when folks have shoulder pain, they think, I need to do more rowing. I'm not doing enough rowing. I need to really increase the amount of rowing that I do, right? Now, I don't think that's a bad idea, but I don't think it's super accurate, right? And the analogy that I give people, especially the students I work with, is that let's say you have Achilles tendonitis, Achilles tendinosis, right? And you're trying to get that person out of pain, right? What do you give them? You give them calf raises. We directly stress the Achilles tendon, right? If someone had shoulder pain and you told them, I need you to stop pressing, I want you to start rowing, that's the same as telling your Achilles patient, I want you to stop all calf raises and I want you to do tib anterior raises all day long, resisted dorsiflexion, right? Now, obviously, that doesn't make any sense, okay? So what I'm getting at is that if you have shoulder pain in the bench press and the rotator cuff is involved, we need to directly stress that in order to make progress over the course of time. Yeah, sure, keep your rows in the mix. Rows are not going to put so much stress on the shoulder. You can probably train those heavy, but make sure you train that part of the rotator cuff and also your pressing because that's going to train the rotator cuff as a byproduct. Okay, so I already said this before. During the bench press, the pecs and the anterior delt are going to be prime movers, right, for the bench press. They're firing aggressively. And what that's going to do is pull the ball forward in the socket, anterior translation, and the posterior cuff, which sits on the back of the ball and socket joint, infraspinatus, has to fire aggressively to keep the ball in the socket. And we have some research about that. And there's, this research study that I'm quoting right here. They put people in a chest press machine and they measured the EMG of the rotator cuff, right, and also the pressing muscles. And what they found is that when you do a bench pressing motion, your infraspinatus is very active, but the front side of the rotator cuff, the subscapularis, is quite quiet. And if we flip it and do a row, the infraspinatus is now quite quiet. So rows are not good rotator cuff exercise for the infraspinatus, right? But the subscapularis EMG goes way up. So when you do a row, the front of the rotator cuff is very active, subscap. When you do a press, the back side of the rotator cuff is very active, infraspinatus. So, I think this is hilarious, I hate rotator cuff exercise. I'll just say that. They're so boring. I feel like you're not accomplishing much of anything when you're doing rotator cuff exercises, but they're so freaking important. And I tell people that they need to eat their vegetables. What I mean by that is that no one likes to eat vegetables, but we know that they're really good for you, so you got to do it, right? You got to eat your broccoli, carrot, salad, all that stuff. That's healthy for you. Working your rotator cuff is kind of the same way. And I think oftentimes people get way too fancy with their shoulder rehab when they need to really stick to the basics. So what are my favorite rotator cuff exercises for shoulder pain during the bench press? It's the basic stuff. It's a sideline dumbbell external rotation here. Great EMG of the infraspinatus, okay? It's a tall sitting dumbbell external rotation. So basically, Kiefer over here is doing a side sit. He's got his elbow resting on his knee here, and he's doing external rotation, internal external rotation with a dumbbell. One of the reasons why I like this exercise is because we have the shoulder sitting a little bit, or excuse me, the elbow sitting at about the same angle as the shoulder, which is going to mimic very similar forces that you're going to see in a bench press. Obviously, when you bench press, your elbow is going to be more or less level with the shoulder, a little bit down towards your side a bit, depending on how wide your grip is. I'm also a very big fan of 90-90 band resisted external rotation. I like to have the elbow a little bit higher, again, because I think it more closely resembles the bench press, right? It's also a little bit more challenging on the shoulder than a typical sideline dumbbell external rotation. And the last one is a dumbbell scaption. The reason being is because it is a phenomenal exercise to isolate the supraspinatus, which again is the most common tendon that gets irritated in the shoulder, right? And especially during bench press.